The young United States was a fragile experiment in the late 18th century. Fresh from the Revolutionary War, the nation grappled with immense financial challenges. Visionaries like Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, saw a path forward. He proposed a bold idea: a national bank. In 1791, the first Bank of the United States was chartered by Congress. It aimed to stabilize the fledgling American currency and manage the government's considerable debts. Yet the first bank faced powerful opposition. Thomas Jefferson and his allies argued fiercely against it. They questioned its constitutionality, pointing out that the Constitution did not explicitly grant Congress the power to create such an institution. Concerns about states' rights also fueled the debate. Many feared a strong central bank would concentrate too much power in the federal government. In 1811, when its 20-year charter came up for renewal, Congress declined to extend it. The nation would soon feel the consequences of this decision, especially during the financial turmoil of the War of 1812. Without a national bank to regulate currency and provide federal credit, the government struggled. State banks issued a confusing array of banknotes, many of questionable value. Inflation soared, and financing the war effort became a monumental task. By 1816, even some former opponents recognized the need for a stabilizing financial institution. Congress chartered the Second Bank of the United States. However, the Second Bank quickly found itself an object of suspicion and hostility. Many states viewed it as a tool of wealthy Eastern elites. Maryland's actions would ignite a legal firestorm, leading to a Supreme Court case that would forever alter the American landscape. In 1818, Maryland passed legislation aimed at the Second Bank of the United States. The law imposed a substantial tax on any bank operating within Maryland's borders that was not chartered by the state legislature. The Second Bank's Baltimore branch was the clear target. James W. McCulloch, the head cashier, refused to pay the tax. Maryland argued it had the inherent right to tax any business within its jurisdiction. The state's lawyers contended that the Constitution did not explicitly grant Congress the power to create a national bank. They adhered to a strict interpretation of the Constitution. If a power was not specifically listed, they argued, then Congress did not possess it. Maryland asserted its right as a sovereign state to tax the bank's activities. This was presented as a crucial defense of states' rights against perceived federal overreach. Maryland's legal team championed a compact theory of the Union. They argued that the United States was formed by an agreement among sovereign states. The power to incorporate a bank, Maryland insisted, was not among those delegated powers. Thus, the federal government had overstepped its bounds. The refusal of James W. McCulloch to comply with Maryland's tax law set the legal machinery in motion. The case, Maryland v. McCulloch, first wound its way through the Maryland state court system. Predictably, the Maryland courts sided with their state. The ultimate arbiter would be the United States Supreme Court. The Second Bank of the United States secured the services of Daniel Webster, one of the most renowned lawyers of his era. Webster's argument before the court was powerful and multifaceted. He forcefully asserted that the authority of Congress to create a national bank was indeed constitutional. This power, he argued, was an implied power. It flowed directly from the necessary and proper clause found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Webster's interpretation of the word necessary was crucial to his argument. He contended that necessary in this constitutional context did not mean absolutely indispensable. Instead, he proposed a broader understanding. Necessary could mean convenient, useful, or appropriate for achieving the legitimate ends of Congress. Beyond the necessary and proper clause, the federal government's defense also rested on the principle of national supremacy. The power to tax, in this context, could become the power to obstruct and even nullify federal actions. The federal government, Webster emphasized, was not a creation of the states but of we the people. In the winter of 1819, the Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, convened to hear the arguments in McCulloch v. Maryland. The court faced two monumental questions. First, did Congress possess the constitutional authority to charter a national bank? Second, if the bank was constitutional, could a state like Maryland tax it? Chief Justice Marshall delivered the unanimous opinion of the court. On the first question, Marshall affirmed Congress's authority. He acknowledged that the power to incorporate a bank was not explicitly listed among Congress's enumerated powers. However, He declared that the Constitution was intended to endure for ages to come. Marshall then turned to the necessary and proper clause. He provided a broad interpretation of what necessary meant. This powerful statement established the doctrine of implied powers. Having established the constitutionality of the bank, Marshall addressed Maryland's power to tax it. Maryland could not tax the national bank. The Supreme Court's decision in McCulloch v. Maryland was a thunderclap. It profoundly strengthened the authority of the federal government. The most immediate impact was the firm establishment of the doctrine of implied powers. This principle meant that Congress was not limited solely to the powers explicitly listed in the Constitution. It could also exercise powers that were reasonably inferred as necessary to carry out its designated functions. The ruling also delivered a powerful affirmation of the supremacy of federal law over conflicting state law. Chief Justice Marshall's opinion made it clear that when a valid federal law and a state law were in conflict, the federal law must prevail. States could not impede the legitimate operations of constitutional laws enacted by Congress. Federal entities, such as the Bank of the United States, were recognized as instruments of the national government. They were created to serve the interests of all the people of the United States. This protection ensured that federal property and operations could not be targeted by hostile state legislatures. Despite its legal brilliance, the decision was met with fierce criticism from supporters of states' rights. The principles articulated by Chief Justice John Marshall in McCulloch v. Maryland remain profoundly relevant today. The doctrine of implied powers has provided the constitutional underpinning for much of the federal government's activity throughout American history. It has allowed Congress and the executive branch to adapt to unforeseen challenges. Many federal agencies, programs, and regulations find their legal justification in the broad interpretation of federal power established by McCulloch. This seminal case played an indispensable role in shaping the intricate balance of power within the American federal system. It provided a strong legal foundation for a robust and effective national government. This was crucial for the country's development, enabling large-scale infrastructure projects and the protection of civil rights. Without the principles affirmed in McCulloch, the federal government might have lacked the authority to guide the nation through periods of crisis and transformation. Federal laws concerning environmental protection, workplace safety, healthcare, education, and national security often rely on a broad understanding of congressional powers. McCulloch v. Maryland laid the essential groundwork for this expansive view of federal authority. It ensured that the national government was not hamstrung by an overly restrictive reading of its powers. The decision ensured that the federal government possessed the necessary authority to govern effectively and to preserve the Union. The echoes of John Marshall's powerful words continue to resonate through American law and society.